Now that you know how to navigate the file system and list files in directories, it's time for you to learn how to create them. The mkdir command, which stands for make directory, is used to create new directories. Let's use this command to create a new one in our home directory that we'll call mastering the UNIX shell, and that we will use for the rest of this course as a lab directory to test our commands in order to minimize the risk of damaging existing files on our system. If you've paid attention, you may have noticed that I used the underscore character to separate each word instead of a space character. The first reason for that is that since spaces and tabs have a special meaning for the shell as they're used to separate the options and the arguments of a command, using spaces would have resulted in creating 4 directories and not 1. I could have of course wrapped the whole expression in quotes, but inserting blank spaces into files and directories names turns out to be a pretty bad idea, and here's the reason why. If you've downloaded files from the internet before, you've probably noticed that file names never contain spaces, but instead underscores and hyphens. This practice is due to a widely accepted naming convention that is directly derived from programming, as programming languages don't allow for spaces or symbols whenever declaring a variable, but it's also related to a wider problem called character encoding. Indeed, using symbols or special characters in file names is more likely to cause compatibility problems between operating systems, resulting in a file becoming unusable when transferred from one to the other. Yet another more practical reason for only using underscores and hyphens is that it's extremely cumbersome to handle space escaping correctly in scripting languages. If we had created this directory with spaces, we would have had to escape every single space character in order to navigate into it or reference it, which is really annoying. So the general rules you should start following as of now when it comes to naming is to only use alphanumeric characters, preferably lowercase, and to replace any space character with underscore or hyphens. That being said, let's now enter our newly created course directory using the cd command and create a few more empty directories within it using the mkdir command once again. What if we now wanted to quickly create the other directories going from 2012 to 2022? We could of course write each of these numbers one after the other, but I think we learned a better way to achieve that. And that way is of course using a brace expansion. Last but not least, mkdir has a very interesting flag, p, which stands for path, that whenever used will automatically create all the intermediate directories of a path like so. We can of course verify that each directory has been properly created by entering them one after the other using a combination of cd and ls, but there's another quicker way. The ls command has a very interesting option named r, which is in fact a shorthand for recursive. What this option will do is that it will recursively enter each subdirectory and list their content one after the other like this. Now that we know how to create directories, let's move on and learn how to create files. But before we do that, there's 2 little things you should know about them. In Unix-like operating systems, files can be of 7 different types as defined by the POSIX norm. In essence, most of the files you're manipulating in your everyday life are either directories or regular files being text files, PDFs, pictures, scripts, and even programs. The way we users usually know that we're dealing with regular files is by simply looking at their extension located in their name, like .pdf for a PDF file or .jpeg for an image file. But here's the interesting thing. In Unix, all of these files extensions are not mandatory as they don't have a special meaning per se for the operating system. Let me quickly demonstrate this by creating a plain text file called main.js with some JavaScript code in it that will simply output the string hello world into the terminal window. If we now run this file using the node utility, we can see that the string was successfully outputted into our terminal as expected. If we now rename this file by giving it a different file extension, like main.pdf for example, and run it again with node, we can see that nothing has changed since the script still runs perfectly, which demonstrates that the system really doesn't care about your file's extension whatsoever. The second thing you should know is that in Unix, hidden files are not characterized by the presence of a hidden property that can be turned on and off like in Windows, but instead by the presence of a dot character at the beginning of their file name. So if you ever wanted to display them, you can use the ls command in combination with the a flag as follows. With that being said, let's now create our first blank file using the touch utility. Originally, touch is used to set the modification and access times of a file, which is not what we're trying to do here, but it turns out that we can also use this command to create new empty files. Indeed, when using touch without options, the command will automatically create the target file if it doesn't exist. And just so you know, touch can of course be combined with brace expansions in order to create multiple files at once.